Okay, this is a quick video for my Illustrator classes for how to put together a 3D mock-up in Illustrator using the 3D effects and some screen captures. So let me start off by going to my workspace and resetting my logo design so that I have the workspace a little bit cleaner. Here we've got the layout. If you remember from last week or a couple of weeks ago actually, I had given you a couple of videos. One was showing you how to create the die line. I also provided you with the die line. So if you wanted to, you could use this one. However, you can make whatever die line you want. So you could download a die line from online. You could find a box and redraw it. You can measure one out. Or you could design it from scratch. But you'll need to have some kind of die line. I'd also made a video which shows you how to create the background based off of that die line. Now, right now, my die line, I have it turned down so you can barely see it. Let me just select all of this. You can see that I have the opacity down at 17% and I have the size of it down at 0.25 of a point. So this is what the line actually looks like. Some parts are in different colors because I talked about how you use spot colors. So I'm not going to go over that right now, but I talked about how we use spot colors sometimes as a way to distinguish things like the folds from the die itself and the perforations and so on. But we have this basic die line. We've got the color on the bottom layer. In between, I've got a work layer. And then one other suggestion I have before we get into the actual demonstration about putting together the construction of this, I've laid out this sort of skeletal version of a package design. This is a good way to start. It talks about that in the video that I'm going to test you about from Farm Design, where it talks about the process of design. And one of the steps that they talk about is creating this sort of skeleton. And I would suggest that if you're struggling to get started with any project, this is a good way to start. Just create an Illustrator file or whatever program you're working with, start the file, and just add the elements that you need in there. So here I need a brand of some kind, I need the flavor, I need some kind of graphic element. So these are just sort of placeholders. And then here this is lorem ipsum or placeholder text, which I've added into these sections with the indication there's probably going to be text there. I've also actually added the number of tea bags and the weight. That's information that I already know. Ideally at this point you put as much information as you have. So if you're working with a client, they would actually probably give you a Word file with text that has to go on here, or they'd provide you a text in an email or what have you. You'd get some text from somewhere else probably for this project. For you, you could, as a student, what you can do is you could look at other tea bags and tea packages, and you could see what information that they generally include. So as an example, you might have a little story about the brand. If the brand is a very established brand, you can talk about its history. If it's one that's been around for a long time, like Twinings in England, or I don't know, maybe Lipton's in the United States. So a well-established brand, you can talk about the history of it. You might also talk about if it's a company's philosophy, if it's a company that has a particular philosophy of sort of, maybe it's particularly interested in projecting an idea of ecologically friendly production, that type of thing. So you could talk about the story of the company. You could also talk a little bit about how to make a good cup of tea, perhaps, step-by-step process. Here I've just put an indication. This might be like the strength of the tea, something along those lines. So you've got to first of all figure out what needs to go on there. Then you can go about starting to design it. So I have here one layer, which is the work layer. The die line, you want to keep nothing else on there except for the die. The background, generally, you want to just keep that as one color, or maybe you have other elements on it, but it's one layer which is just for the background. So you can keep that locked when you're working on the type and the graphics. And then you may separate this into multiple layers. So you might have one layer which is for the graphic elements, for instance. So you might have another layer which is for the typography. You might just break it up much more than I would. So you might decide that you want to have, for instance, the barcode on its own layer, and this graphic on its own layer, and this graphic on its own layer, and the brand on its own layer, and so on. You could certainly do that. It's whatever really makes sense to you, but I would definitely suggest that you start by separating the die onto its own layer and the background separately, and then any of the other stuff, any of the graphics that go onto it, should be sandwiched between those two layers. Okay, once you've got your design finished, so let's pretend that I've finished my design now, and I wanted to make a three-dimensional view, because if you're showing this to a client, it's difficult for them to get a sense of that as a T box when they're seeing it all flattened out like this. We want to see what it looks like in 3D. So normally the process I would do in a real project is that we would do 3D views, not right away. So to begin with, we would present maybe just the front of the box or flat versions of it. But eventually we want to show a 3D view. And then actually after that, we'd make a physical mock-up. So remember, as part of this project, if you want, you can make a physical mock-up, photograph it, and you can do that as an extra credit assignment. The way you would do that is you would print out your design, do a good quality paper, print a good quality print of it, spray glue that onto some thin cardstock, and then cut it out with an X-Acto knife and a steel rule all the way around the outside. And anywhere where there's a fold, you can just score it by putting your knife through on the front so you can see where the die is. Say maybe here, and then here, and then on the back score it. So you'd cut all the way around the outside here, and then score on the back of it through these lines that are on the inside where the fold is. Then you can fold it all together. This is the panel where it glues together. So this will glue onto this panel and hold the whole thing together. These top and bottom just fold in. So your box, if you're using a different die, obviously might be slightly different the way you build it, but that's the basic process. Print it out onto some good quality, photo quality inkjet paper. Spray glue it onto some thin cardstock. Cut it out, score the back of it, and then fold it together. Okay, so now to make a 3D view of it, what I'd suggest is you could just take each of these panels and make them into graphics in Illustrator and then put them into the symbols panel. The problem with that is oftentimes with package design, you may have elements that go across panels. So this becomes a little bit tricky. Like maybe I have this isn't a very good example, but let's say for instance that this graphic, instead of being in the middle there, comes like this. Now how do I take this part and put it into here and take this part and put it into there? So what I'm doing is I'm taking a screen capture of each part. So I'm going to first of all lock every layer except for the die line layer. Select all of the die line. Set it so that it's got a very thin stroke, 0.25 of a point. And then I'm going to set the opacity to about 20%. So you can still see it, but only just. It doesn't really interfere with the design. Now I can do Shift-Command-4. Shift-Command-4 will give me a screen capture. Now, to be honest with you, I've forgotten what it is on a PC. But on a Mac, I would just do a screen capture like this. Shift-Command-4, drag across, because you'll get a crosshair. Drag across the area you want to keep. And I want to try to keep it within... Now, I need to zoom out a little bit, actually. I'm too close here. I need to be able to see an entire panel. So let me start again. So I do Shift-Command-4 and drag across this area like this. And you want to have them all basically zoomed in at the same zoom when you do it. So I do this one, then I'll do this one. So these are my 3 screen captures that I've already got. So the screen captures will be stored on your desktop if you're working on a Mac. If you're working on a PC, I think it also stores it there, or it stores it in Clipboard and you can then paste it. I forget how that works. So this one I've got the guide there, you can see it's showing up. And because when you're doing the screen capture, it captures whatever you have on the screen. So it doesn't really matter for the purpose of demonstrating that, but just kind of be aware of that, leave things out of the way. Make sure there's no smart guides on showing up when you're doing the screen capture. And then what we need to do is we need to make a 3D box to put these onto. So the box is going to be the same as one of these panels. It could either be the front or the side, to be honest with you. So let's take the front and I'll make a duplicate of this. I want this to be a grey fill with 100% opacity. And let's make it a light grey. Once I've got that shape, I know the size of this. Now what I need to know is the size of this panel. So the depth that goes back on the box. So if I draw another rectangle here, and go across to there, you can see that I have the width of 2.63. Now actually when we made this, if you remember, it was actually 2.65. Sorry, 2.65. So we're going to add a Effects, 3D, Extrude and Bevel. And then right here where it says Extrude Depth 50 points, I'm going to set it to 2.65. And it's inches, so I need to type in IN. And then go ahead and press it. Oh, and actually at the top here, I'm going to change this to isometric left. You could also use perspective, like off-axis front, for instance, if you wanted to, and you could add a bit of perspective to it to make it more three-dimensional. This is another option. So the one that I have over here is using isometric. This is using a more sort of traditional perspective. Now I'm going to go to Map Art, make sure that Preview is on, and then on each surface, so this looks like it's the front surface right now. It's doing a weird preview for some reason, but let's try it anyway. So I think this is the front. I'm going to choose front, which I've called fronty for some reason, but there you go, same thing. This is probably coming out a little bit bigger than it really is, so I'm going to do scale to fit. So now it's all fitting onto there. And then we need to go to the next surface. So that's the back, this is the other side, this is the bottom, this is this side. So if we now choose the side panel, and then this one I need to rotate it, and I'm going to have to scale this manually, because if I click scale to fit, it's going to put it vertical again, as you can see, and it's sort of squashing everything. So let me clear that and do it again. So side, and then I'm going to rotate it, holding shift so it constrains it, and then I'll drag it in also holding shift until it meets the corner, and then same here. It should be the right size because we've measured how far this should go back. Now this one, as you can see, is upside down, so I can rotate it this way. And now we've got it the right way up. I'll go to the next surface. This is the top. Choose the top, put it on there, and again we can do scale to fit this time. Go ahead and press OK. Actually, before I press OK this time, I'm going to do shade artwork. So that picks up the tonal values of the box. If you wanted to, when you press OK, in this section here, which may not be visible, you can put more options to make it visible. You could add an additional light if you wanted to add more light to it, and we could put one maybe on the top, and then one right out in front. So you can adjust the position and the brightness of that and so on. And then go ahead and press OK. So that's your basic setup for the 3D view. Now remember that when you come to present this project in the end, you want to imagine that you're presenting it to a client. So maybe you want to create a background for the box to sit on. Maybe you want to add a little bit of information on the side and so on. So that's it for this video. There's a quick demonstration of how to go ahead and set up a 3D view of your package design for your Illustrator class. See you later. Bye.